Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us on the Activate and Illuminate podcast with Mel. I'm your host, Mel. Together, we're going to be diving into some stories of ordinary people doing a little bit of extraordinary things. People who've maybe pushed their bodies, their mindsets, or maybe society's paradigms. So you're going to find yourself maybe wanting to laugh, cry, or even be inspired. We would invite you to share, like, and subscribe, to sign up for our newsletter as well on activateandilluminate.com. Now, just keep in mind that this information that you are going to hear is informational and educational for entertainment purposes only. This does not constitute professional advice of any kind. The views expressed are those of myself and guests only. Listeners are encouraged to seek professional and legal advice regarding their own situations. So, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, and thanks again for being here. Hey, everyone out there. So thank you so much for tuning in today. So today is a little bit different. Today is a recap. It's a little bit of a celebration. It's something that I feel super proud about. Today marks a year since I've started this journey of the Activate and Illuminate podcast. In case you didn't know, this was not necessarily a journey that I planned to go on. In fact, one of the guests, which I'll talk about a little bit further coming up, was one of the inspiration and idea behind this for me. So I just want to give a little credence and shout out and a little recap of all of the guests that we've had on.
This episode brought to you by protandemcanada.lifevantage.com. What if you could turn on your body to work like it was supposed to? What if you could have it remember how to handle toxins, stress, and the environment like it used to when you were young? What if it worked for your pets too? What if this is not about supplementing something that is missing, but activating something that has gone dormant? About actually turning on your body to make these things again. Learn how to activate your body now. Check us out, protandemcanada.lifevantage.com.
So I'm going to start with that, and I hope you'll follow along and listen, because I know that of those 50 episodes, I'm sure there's not a lot of people out there, maybe besides my mom, that might have heard them all. So I want you to just follow along with me and explore some of the places that we've gone. So we started out with the intro episode, talking about why I'd done this and why I named it Activate and Illuminate. And I will tell you that that concept of activation is something that I've been working with for quite some time. And seeing people get inspired, seeing people turn on their potential, seeing people turn on their lives in ways. I was doing it originally from a cellular perspective, but seeing that happen in people was something that was honestly contagious. And I loved sharing about it, and I loved talking about it. And that was the original concept behind Activate and Illuminate. So just so y'all know where it was born from. Now, the first gentleman that I had on was a guy by the name of Paul Brooks, who, when I met him, he shared with me his journey of being in the banking industry, being in the investment world for most of his life, and essentially it not resonating with him, it not feeling like the spot where he needed to be. And he got out of that. He took everything that he had put into that and his life savings and his retirement options, and started to give 0% loans to farmers. That excited me when I was talking to him, and I wanted to know exactly how he did it and some of his journey around that. So from there, we went into episode 3 with Sherry Pylon. Now, Sherry was a connection out of the U.S. She was a mother of an autistic child who had also had a life working in the sex industry, to be honest with you. This one challenged me a little bit. It pushed me out of my comfort zone. I had a little bit of, I guess, not wanting judgment from people as as we were sharing it, I didn't want there to be judgment for her. I didn't want there to be judgment for me. And it was a hard one to put out there and where I was at that time. And one of the things that surprised me the most was in sharing her story, I expected it to be maybe one of trauma and abuse and different things that had that lifestyle and had been about from a feeling of disempowerment. But in fact, it was opposite. And I found that my conversation with Sherry was so inspiring, and it challenged a lot of the thoughts that I had had around the industry in general. So tune in to episode 3. Now, from there, we went to episode 4 with Dee. Now, the whole reason that this podcast is here is because of Dee. I reached out to her for something else and for her help with a different business project. And she had said, honestly, Mel, I don't know if I'm your gal. What I generally do is help produce podcasts. Have you ever thought about having a podcast? And I was like, no. But when she asked me that, my body tingled and had different physical responses in ways that I didn't really understand, but I knew that I couldn't ignore. And I kept having this idea of a podcast roll around in my brain. And so then we started talking about it more, and she helped and was the leading person behind getting this off the ground. But in doing that, we decided to set up all the audio equipment, all of the recording stuff. And I said, can we just run through, just so I know a little bit what I'm doing, can we run through and kind of practice? And on that day, she said to me, well, sure. But just so you know, I kind of have a story. And I was like, what? And I didn't know any of her story until we started recording. So her story was one of being diagnosed with schizophrenia and just some of the challenges with mental health, some of the challenges that she now knows is a lot more than schizophrenia and actually intuitive gifts and some of these knowings and different things that she's experienced through the years. And it was her journey through the health system and just trying to understand a little bit about what some of these things that she was hearing were. So we get into it. And that was my first time hearing her story. And she was the producer of this podcast. And yeah, some of it was absolutely brand new information to me as we were recording it. So from there, I was racking my brain to see who I could come up with that was inspirational and that people would be inspired by their ordinariness, but also by what they had accomplished. And one of the gentlemen that we have in our life, his name is Jeff Frank. I had seen him transform his body and his mindset in ways that I didn't even think was possible, to be honest with you. In his 40s, he had decided to get into competitive arm wrestling. And from there, it turned into competitive martial arts. And he transformed his body, his mindset. You know, he used to show up at our at different times when he was in our province with, you know, an energy drink and a Coke or a Pepsi. And, you know, he could barely make it up our walk or our stairs. And he transformed himself into a machine. And I'm just so proud of everything that he did with this. And now he's competing on world stages for world titles. So that was a fascinating story about his journey and how he says essentially your coach and your attitude is everything. So the next podcast was talking about all things health and activation with Dr. Svetta Silverman. Now, Svetta was kind of the leading reason behind how I had heard about some of the activation principles that I had gotten involved with. And we start talking just about life, about her journey, about her story of immigrating here from the Soviet Union and having to retrain, go to school. She had been a surgical pathologist in Russia, came to Canada, retrained as a breast pathologist, went on to get a naturopathic oncology certification and also a anti-aging fellowship. So she knows so much about the body, just about health. And it was in that that I just was fascinated by this idea of really being our best selves and our best cellular selves. So she gives a lot of fantastic advice. It's not all medical. A lot of it is mindset and just how to be the best person you can be as well. So then we go on to a conversation about Feng Shui. Now, this was episode 7, now with Lindsay Doyle. Now, Lindsay made me think about our spaces differently, made me think about our houses differently. She absolutely transformed my life. And I thought I had met her originally in my activation business, and it was under that umbrella. And at that time, I thought I was kind of just helping her out. I thought I was like, okay, yeah, I'll let you come to my house and do this little feng shui assessment, and we'll see where that goes. And when she came in and she sat me down and she gave me this like hour-long questionnaire that was very emotional and made me just like really take stock of where I was with everything. And as we start going through this, she was like, oh yeah, I can absolutely see how you're feeling. I can absolutely see that. I see that in your house. I see some of the disconnection. I see some of and she made me think about just everything differently. And she actually, it took us about maybe 6-8 months, but she was able to help me transform my space into what I think was the container to help hold, activate, and illuminate, to be honest with you. So it's a really inspiring conversation. Now from there, episode 8, I had the honor of meeting Robin Lynn. It was actually at a Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton event in the US. And when I start talking to her, she starts sharing her story of being we'll call it a victim of the 60s scoop. Now, she doesn't see herself this way. She doesn't see herself as a victim, and she doesn't necessarily identify as that, which was actually so refreshing. But she gave such a honest and humbling perspective of some of our Canadian history that frankly is a little bit embarrassing, that I didn't know all of the details of. So she was taken by her at 4 years old from her home in what was called the 60s scoop and placed into, that's where we hear about a lot of the residential school system and some of the atrocities that happened there. And she gives an honest document of what happened with her and just maybe a little bit of a different story than we have been able to probably accept as Canadian citizens. And it was an important story to tell. And mostly it was an important story to hear. So I would invite you to listen to that. From there, we went into episode 9 with Ria Tarnava out of Calgary, who is a sound healing expert. She has created a method called the Infinite Energy Method, and she trains people. She does all different kinds of support for our physical selves, our mental, emotional, spiritual, and she's having fantastic success with helping a lot of people with a lot of health-related issues right now. And, I've always known this from a fairly young age that frequency, energy, sound, light is so much more important than we give it credence to. And Ria was really able to share some of why this works, how it works, in a way that was from a fairly scientific perspective. She's got multiple degrees, she's got multiple titles, and she really helped me understand a little bit more about why. So from here, we go into a conversation with a lady in the UK, episode 10, Dr. Jo Whitaker. Now, Jo was from a traditional scientific background in biomedical sciences, and she's now in the natural healing segment and frequency arena. She has a multitude of different titles as well. She's a doctor in the UK, but she partnered with her partner, Kelly Heinsohn, a business partner, in a company called Crystal Water Experience. And that company there, they do frequency devices that help us enhance our biofield enhance our energetic signature, help our health, help our body. It's just fascinating. And she gets so much more into the science about it, and then just how doing some of these simple things and simple technologies actually connects you to nature, grounds you to nature in ways that supports your body that we don't even know about. So that was a fascinating conversation. I had originally booked to talk to both of them, Kelly and Joe. We had some audio issues with Joe, and so we decided to do it into 2 different segments. And then I actually have them both on again for a combo session because they were just so interesting. So we talked to Joe. And then we went and we talked to Brian Palmer. Now, Brian is from Alberta, Canada. I had met him at an event in BC, and he was just so honest and so transparent. It was an event called the New Human event. It was Zach Bush was being featured, and he talks about his life from a troubled childhood, addiction, to a path of healing and connection. And it was just this feeling of love that I felt him experience when he was sharing his story. He talked about some of his judgments, how he was able to release them, believe it or not, at the trucker convoy, and just what that meant to him. And he's just a lovely, lovely soul. And he gets real about some of his hurts, past childhood sexual abuse, prison time, how he was kind of running his life off into a ditch with all kinds of addictions, and just how he's been able to turn himself around. So that was an honor, to be honest with you. And we talked to Kelly Heinsohn again, who is half of the Joe and Kelly Crystal Water experience. Now, Kelly had originally essentially died. She had this life-threatening diagnosis. Her body was falling apart. She was in a coma. And when she came out of it and they realized that she was going to live, she ended up having just a little bit of a completely different experience. Some might call it a near-death experience. She ended up not necessarily being the same person that she was before. And she came back into this life with some knowledge and abilities to tap into nature, to tap into a lot of what has come to be the result of the Crystal Water Experience products, which is the ability to tap us into our innate selves and into our innate blueprint and into our biofield and enhance it. And so she came with all this info about sacred geometry and all these different things that she didn't know about before. And she thought maybe a lot of this was quite woo before. And it is a fascinating story of how she actually came to have some of these gifts that she does now. So from there, I was called up by a friend of mine who'd seen that I'd done a couple of different podcasts and said, Melanie, I just saw this young man speaking in Red Deer, Alberta. He's coming to Edmonton tomorrow. He's speaking at this theater that was in Edmonton. And she's like, if anything is possible, you need to get yourself there and you need to talk to him and you need to have him on your podcast. So I did. I bought a ticket. I drove an hour to go listen to him that night. And his name is Kaelan Watson. Now, he had by himself, solo, gone on a 3,000-kilometer canoe trip around the northern part of Canada and northern part of the Northwest Territories, all around the top, and then down through northern Saskatchewan. By himself, it took him quite some time, and it was his trials and tribulations, and some of it physical, some of it spiritual, some of it realizing that he'd had some experiences that he couldn't really explain, how he was helped, how he managed through, how he lived through it. And he was just a fascinating young man to speak to and so inspirational. It made me think, okay, Melanie, if this guy can do 3,000 kilometers in a canoe by himself, like, what are you not doing? What can you do? Like, surely you could walk a few miles a day. And just like, how was I not living my life in all of the adventures that it could be? And so he really made me question my sense of adventure, to be honest with you, and just what was possible. So Kaelan Watson, he was fantastic. That was episode 13. So there we went to episode 14 with a Edmonton police whistleblower. So he had realized through some of his um, experiences as a homicide detective and different things that just some of our situations and our policing situations, there's just so much more involved. And I think through some of that, he started to understand that there was some injustices happening, and he set out to expose it. He ended up losing his job and it not going really that well for him. I know at different times he felt safety issues. He felt all kinds of things that I could imagine after many, many years in the police force you'd feel when you were kind of put out to pasture for wanting to expose and share perhaps how some injustices that were happening. So that was a really interesting episode. And it made me question some of the things that we know about our systems, our police force, our support services, children's services, different things. And I would encourage everybody to go listen to that one. So from there, we kind of switched it back to the spiritual side. And this young man, his name is Quentin Fast. It was episode 15. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Mayan calendar. So I'd heard about this Mayan calendar and I'd met Quentin at an event and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so inspiring. Like, you have so much information about this. And honestly, his whole purpose in life, or he feels, is to be able to connect people to this Mayan calendar and some of the ideas behind it, and that we've actually been subverted away from nature and away from natural rhythms and cycles. And this 13 moon calendar, he talks about how the cultures that observe this 13 moon calendar do not have the same types of, I would say, disharmonious. For example, one of the things that stood out to me was he was talking about the months. So November, being representing like the actual word November representing 9, but actually being the 11th month. December, which is the word that represents 10, but actually being the 12th month, and how everything has been subverted a little bit to take us out of our natural rhythms. And also some of the natural cycles that we have been led away with the Gregorian calendar. And it made me just think about that a little bit differently because, as we think about 12 months and all of the months being a little bit of different times and different lengths versus the 28-day 13 moon cycle. And he was able to break this down for me and explain the way that energy is kind of used and tapped into, and ancient sites, all different kinds of ancient knowledge. He's been studying with Buddhist monks since he was really young. And yeah, he was a fascinating young man. Actually, he also helps people personally how they can do this in their own life as well. So from there, we went to episode 16. Emma Wood. Now, Emma, it was her inspiring journey. She's written a book on it. Her book's called From Shy to Shining. And she talks about her experience of being behind the camera and as a photographer, and also doing boudoir shoots for people, and how she really taps people into themselves, into who they are, and how she was able to transform herself from somebody that, wasn't barely hardly able to talk to just a shining example of confidence. And her book is something that you're all going to want to see. So from there, we talk to Corey Bignell. Now, this was episode 17. She calls herself the unregistered nurse. And, in the last many years of what transpired here in Canada, and she was a nurse in the health industry and just felt like she couldn't necessarily take on some of those mandates and things that were being asked of her. She ended up moving to Nicaragua and completely reinventing herself and still helping people in the healthcare capacity, but just being an absolute shining example of sovereignty, of choices, and how we can always, in an instant, recreate our lives. And she has a fantastic, large, thriving community. She does retreats there as well. She honestly, she was just such a joy to speak with. So then we go to episode 18. Now, Kat Halushka. I said that wrong. Now, she's the founder of Profitable Impact Academy, and I found her story fascinating. She is an immigrant as well, came to Canada when she was quite young, and just her story of learning English, her journey through entrepreneurship. It was kind of interesting as I was researching her and just talking about her. I came across a letter that she had written to herself from when she was quite young, and I was able to read that letter to her in this podcast. It was quite a tear-jerking moment for both of us, and it was just a really heartfelt moment, and she has so much wisdom for us. She was a fantastic business mind, and her community is serving a ton of people. So from there, we speak with Ashley, who this was episode 19. Now, she had experienced sexual abuse really quite young, and sexual abuse in her family. And a lot of this episode was talking about just the implications of that. Her family that, a lot of her family still connected with and saw. And she was having to be around this person for quite some time, and just how it changed some of her parenting decisions, different signs to look out for in kids that might be having this happen to them, different ways of managing how to handle, future relationships with families and what it actually means. And it was a eye-opening experience. And she was very brave. She talked about things she'd never talked about before. And it was an honor for her to be able to share her story. So from there, episode 20 was with Nicole Murphy. Now, Nicole was a media professional she was passionate about storytelling and creativity. And we talk about her journey of being in the media and just some of the misconceptions, some of the ideas behind it, some of the perhaps ideas that the media really was there as a tool to put out a message in a lot of situations. And she was able to see from an inside perspective many, many different things that most of us don't know about. And I found her viewpoint just absolutely intriguing. And I think what it did for me was it makes you question everything. Makes you question, well, why is this story being told? Why, whose sides are being represented? What's the message that I'm being asked to believe? All these different things. And she absolutely was a voice and a story worth listening to. So from here, we go on to talk with Krista Zaft, who is she's the voice behind the Becoming Sound podcast. Now, Krista was her son struggled with addiction in a huge way, and their family was able to do something, basically stage an intervention and get him back to wholeness in a way that, a lot of families struggling with stuff like this wish they would be able to. She's gone on to create a podcast, Becoming Sound, and she talks about just what it takes. She has different guests on talking about addiction, about, what to do with your kids, with people in your family that are struggling through this. And and also about her own life and her life and how she had grown up and had, dealt with some of these things in different ways as well. So it was a very eye-opening conversation on addiction and just how some of these past traumas and different experiences can lead us to recreate our life in a way that is maybe subconscious and we don't even realize that we're doing it, but we're actually recreating the exact thing that we came from. That was a great chat with Krista. So then we went on to a young man named Mateo. Now, he had or has a diagnosis of muscular dystrophy. And it was just when we chatted, he was 16. And his mom was there listening as well, just for anybody wondering whether or not there was parental consent. But we chatted with him about his feelings of having it's a little bit of an invisible diagnosis. Nobody actually really knows that he's sick or has this debilitating muscular condition. And his experiences with mental health, his experiences with our school systems, his experiences with things that help him. He is such an intuitive young man who's mature beyond his years. I swear most adults are not this mature. He is having the hard discussions of, what happens when I'm not mobile anymore? What happens when, he's been given a diagnosis of a shortened lifespan? He's been given, some of these different hard concepts to wrap his head around. And at the same time, trying to get through teenagehood and everything that entails. So I actually feel a lot of emotion just talking about it, but this episode just had me with I was sitting there with tears just flowing down my cheeks talking to him. And he really was able to make me feel something that I'm hoping you guys all feel as well by listening to his episode. And it was such a great just reminder that everybody that's out there that you may not know that they're struggling with things that may be really affecting them. And this whole idea of invisible disabilities was something that he really made me think about. So from there to episode 23, we went to Stacy Berger. Now, she has a thriving community. She is a renowned coach. She is a mindset expert. She helps so many people just be able to examine a little bit about what's inside of them and how their thoughts are creating their lives. And I have absolutely had my life changed for the better because of Stacy Berger and some of her events and her community. And she just we get into it, and I remember us talking about different ideas and different thoughts. And even in the episode, she challenges me on some of my thinking. And it's always such a great reminder when people remind you that nothing outside of yourself can really change what's happening inside of yourself. And it's that's happening inside of ourselves and our thoughts and our minds and our creations, which dictate that which is happening outside of ourselves, and that we are in constant creation of our experience and our life. And she is just a shining example of that. So her episode was episode 23. So then we go to, it was episode 24, and it's called From Bars to Jars, a Saucy Redemption Story with Joe Gallagher. Now, Joe, I'd met him on a podcast group, and we talked a little bit about his story in his book that was written From Bars to Jars. And, he shares his story of addiction, a troubled childhood, and different times of jail and different things. And then this inspiring story of how he got out of jail and he was in support group, and he had gone to the support group with his grandma's recipe of sauce that he had made. And everyone there was like, "Oh my gosh, Joe, like you should bottle this stuff." And so he thought, well, what else do I have to do? I can't even get a job at Walmart right now. I've had a record, I've had this, I've had that. And he started this company called Apostoli Pasta Sauce, and he's taking it in so many different directions right now. But essentially, it's a redemption story, and it's a story about him and how he's found faith, how he's found courage, how he's found so many things, and how he's really stepped into who he was truly meant to be, and he has such vulnerability and such humbleness that you're just going to love him the instant you hear him. So then we go to a guy named Johnny Parsons. Now, Johnny also had a addiction story of just, getting young, getting messed up on drugs, coming from a family that, they weren't necessarily all messed up on drugs, but everyone is led to their experiences through their own reasons. And he just talked about some of the willpower, some of what it actually took some of the circumstances that actually broke him down, make him hit rock bottom, and then actually want to change his life, create essentially an empire in what he's doing right now. And just from a business perspective and work values, and he was so inspiring. It always makes me feel a lot when a big, tough, strong guy just breaks down, what brought them to their knees and how they got back up. So, yeah, that was the story of Johnny Parsons. So then we speak with Sonny Batra. Now, he is an applied health scientist. He had a science background, but he went into the world of functional nutrition and how he could help people. After seeing some things around him that really challenged his perspectives, he was able to heal his children of different things and himself. So he was essentially being asked to use himself as a guinea pig in different situations. His body was falling apart. And he's created a community and a support for people that are struggling. And he has a ton of information and a ton of knowledge that he was able to share. And he's just an amazing, kind man. After we did the podcast, I was reached out to by a multitude of different people saying, this man changed my life. This man saved my life. This man saved my husband's life. And so it was just such great confirmation that I had a great story on. So then we go episode 27, Tommy Carbascio. Now, Tommy, he was a host of a podcast called Forbidden Chronicles. We talk about just his journey, talking about, some of the weird and wackadoodle things that are out there that he's able to cover, forbidden knowledge, forbidden different things. He also went on this journey of being a health coach and just helping people with some of their natural things. You can find some of his podcasts as well on Gnostic TV. So he was just fantastic. He has written a book called How Not to Suck as a Human. And it's a great book. He sent it to me as well, and I've really enjoyed it. So then we go to episode 28, Stephanie Ward. Now, Stephanie was out of the UK, and she has done something really inspirational. She started a VA services company, virtual admin, for people that she calls it, what does she call it here? She calls it she calls it the Spicy Brain Collective. Now, she helps neurodivergent CEOs, neurodivergent founders be more of who they're meant to be in their life. And she absolutely gets these superpowers. She has them. And she has created a community for neurodivergent voices to come together in business and supporting neurodivergent voices in business. She has a plethora of knowledge around this and just different ways that she can help people that, maybe think a little differently than the average Joe, which honestly I think is great. So our next podcast was episode 29 with Celine Squibb. Now, Celine shares her journey of growing up in she calls it a Jehovah cult, but growing up as a Jehovah Witness. She was married at 17. She's still married. She's got 4 children. They were able to get out of that experience and just recreate their life in a little different way. And she has taken that knowledge or that experience. She ended up just becoming an absolute boss of creating businesses from home. She developed a company making bath bombs, selling them online. She was able to create a huge social following, and she's done fantastic things for herself. So from there, we talk with Victoria Burmeister. Now, Victoria at 19 became a quadriplegic, and it was her journey of mindset, of child rearing, of having babies. As a quadriplegic, she had gone through a couple different marriages, and it was just her journey about life and remaining victorious. So she's so resilient. her story was one of, just resilience and passion, and also made me realize, just to be grateful for everything that we have. There's people out there trying to raise kids from a chair. There's people out there trying to have kids from a chair. There's people out there, trying to get through the daily tasks in a way that is probably, a lot more difficult than it is for some of us. Yeah, she absolutely made me rethink gratefulness. Then from there, 31 was a recap and a coming together of the Kelly and Joe conversation that we talked about before with Crystal Water Experience. So in this conversation, we go more into what they're doing for what they're able to do for people, for animals, for pain, for, their experience, and their products are absolutely groundbreaking. I implore everybody to go to crystalwaterexperience.com. You can find a code for them in the show notes and on our podcast. And it's just groundbreaking. It's revolutionary. So that was a talk with both of them, kind of how Kelly had come across this, how a lot of her gifts from her experience were born, and then how they joined up together and got the science part of it with Dr. Joe and were able to create what they created. So then we go to episode 32 with Stephanie Elizondo Grease. Now, she was a published author. She has a book called Art Above Everything. She's got a few different books. Art Above Everything. And it was her journey of going around to different places in the world, talking to artists, talking to different people, and just how particularly women in community and women artists were able to support their community and were really able to bring resources and value to their community through their artwork. And so she went all around to all different places around the world, talking to different creators, different people from this perspective of how exactly some of these small local artists are absolutely transforming the world and commerce in their small subsections of the planet, if you might say. So from there, episode 33, this was absolutely mind-blowing to me. A young girl from Eastern Canada shares her journey of being injured with the Moderna vaccine. It was actually attributed to that. And she within 24 hours, she was a quadriplegic in a chair. And just everything that she has gone through to, one, fight for her health, fight for services. She's an absolute warrior. She did not get born into this life on easy street. She also has had some very significant challenges. And her journey as an absolute fighter for advocacy and herself and others, and then watching what's happened to her. She's actually, from my knowledge, the first person to take Moderna to court in BC. And it's quite an interesting situation and case. So if there was ever any cause that you wanted to donate to, hers is one of huge value. And she's called Kaelan, OPKAYLA.ca on different platforms. So from there, we go to one of my favorite guys out of Salmon Arm, BC, Kevin Smith. Now, he is just so passionate about, he's with a company called Silverman, and they've created a biochar product that, honestly, when I heard about it, I had no idea all the different applications of it. I had no idea the agricultural applications, the small home gardener applications, how it actually changes your soil, makes it grow things so much better. And it was just a fascinating discussion on utilizing what was a waste product of the forestry industry and turning it into something that is absolutely helping humanity. So we named this episode Biochar. Can it save the world? So you're going to go, you'll never meet a more passionate individual, and particularly about biochar. So from there, we go into having a really open, honest, raw conversation with Dean Rasmussen. And we're talking about transitioning. He was a woman, and he's transitioning into his journey as a trans man and exploring themes. I ask him some really hard questions in this. I ask him, just about family dynamics, relationship dynamics, masculinity, identity, how our idea of identity maybe differed a little bit, and just this idea of identity and how from, it can be polarizing or uniting. And so we approach this conversation from a uniting perspective of, just bringing together different voices, different people, and all of us having a human experience. So, yeah, it was a fun one. It started out around a campfire, and I just had so many questions for him. And I was like, will you come on a podcast? And he was like, absolutely. And he was so brave. He was so, he just told it like it was. And he had a great perspective. From there, this was an interesting one for me. Episode 36. We talk with my daughter, Kiera, and it was her world and journey of learning about some of her spiritual gifts, intuitive gifts, just what that meant going through school, how it transpired in her life, some of our different parenting things. I feel like there's always maybe room for improvement as a parent, but it was interesting to be on this conversation, and I had a bunch of anxiety about telling it, about her being out there. I felt myself protective with that, but she honestly, you'll hear when you listen to it, she's very well versed, and she's much older than her years, and she was just able to give a perspective that I think a lot of you, perhaps even with kids, with different gifts, you might want to listen to. And for anybody out there struggling with some of the things that we talk about in that, she has the ability to help so many people, from physical things, emotional things that are maybe impacted by spiritual things, energetic things. And it was just a all-encompassing conversation on some of those topics. So, but as a mom, it was a hard one to throw out there into Neverland. So from there, we talk about Tony Chin. Now, I've never tracked down anybody so hard as I did this man. I was like a cyber stalker. I tell you what, he comes from a small community, and he was also a member of a police force. So he doesn't have a big social media presence. But he wrote a book from his mother's perspective. His mother escaped communist China when she was much younger. She actually swam away from communist China. At one point, she swam away and she got washed back up on shore, and the military found her and put her back in prison. She was able to escape again and swim to freedom, and ended up in a small community here in Canada with a Chinese restaurant and different things in their community. And he wrote a book called The Freedom Swimmers. Now, I'm telling you, I found this book to be one of the few novels that I was able to read like back to back in like a day. I did not want to put it down. And particularly, I think some of the roots and perhaps some of the warnings that he had, and that his mom had, and some of the things that she was seeing of society. It was just fascinating, his perspective and her perspective through this book. So absolute hero, bravery, and just an example of being given a life because of someone's sacrifice. So from here, we go back to the UK. We go to a Dr. Debs Eastwood, who is an anesthesiologist, but she's doing things a little differently. She has a holistic approach with patient care, and she uses hypnotherapy in surgery. And what she's found is that her surgeries go better, all different kinds of things. She was fascinating to listen to, and to her story of just struggles to get to be an anesthesiologist, and then some of what she knows now about our medical system and some of these ancient tools and techniques and tricks that are helping support it and really creating validity to it. So how her mind changed on the science of it. That was a very interesting conversation. So from there, we go into a conversation with Teresa DeRox, who is one of the founders of a group called Kindred Meditation. Now, they're teaching this form of meditation all throughout the world. It's an ancient form of meditation, and they've created a community that is helping people process their life, different situations, regulate themselves, and just handle life a little differently. I know Teresa herself is just an example of compassion, an example of giving, an example of authenticity. And some of their online programs and different events are just spectacular. So check that out, Kindred Meditation. So from there, we go to small town Alberta. A lady by the name of Sarah Junk, who took her family's challenges, a son with Lyme's disease, and transformed their learning environment in the face of COVID into something else. They ended up having all different kinds of children come and learn in a homeschooling container about all different kinds of things. She has so many skills. She's teaching herbology, she's teaching animal husbandry, she's teaching all these different things, even in the schools in some of these different locations. But she did it all from her house, and it was her experience of homeschooling, from what started out as a medical necessity of the school perhaps not necessarily understanding what was happening with her son, to being a transformational experience for a lot of kids. So this was such a great example to me of somebody just creating their own experience of what absolutely worked for themselves and their family. And it was challenged some of my perceptions of traditional schooling, and I thought it was fantastic. Then we talked with Teresa, originally from Poland, here living in Eastern Canada. Now she had come, and she's talking a lot on the importance of civil liberties. She had escaped Poland, communist Poland, and she just emphasizes different things that are happening here in Canada, some of their experiences, and how she was able to just create this idea of sovereignty within herself. Her story, I didn't realize so much of what she shared in that story of just what had necessarily happened in Poland, and maybe also what is happening here. She had some grave warnings for us, and her perspective was very unique, and I found it very valuable. So from here, everybody I'm sure has heard of what happened in BC in Canada with the ostriches. And I was able to get Dr. Jeff Wilson, who had been the Supreme expert witness testimony from the Supreme Court of Canada, to talk about it. Now, he's a veterinary epidemiologist. He's a specialist in this, and he talks about the outbreak response, how maybe it wasn't necessarily accurate. And it was his perception of what's actually happening in Canada with some of the CFIA stuff. And it was an interesting perspective. He has a ton of knowledge, and he also has some ideas how we can, maybe make things a little bit more smooth in the future using some of these principles. So him and his company they're looking to be able to have it come from more of a community organized way of outbreak response versus a heavy top-down way of outbreak response. So it was a very interesting conversation. Now, from there, we go into a lady by the name of Jane Scharf, who I had been connected to. Someone had connected me to her. Now, she is one of the most brilliant legal minds I've ever chatted with. She has a legal background. She understands our constitutions, our rights, our entire legal system, how it's been perhaps altered, how it's been, not adhered to, how it has been changed or maybe ignored in certain cases and this conversation, and I heard so many people talk about it afterwards, it gave them hope. It gave them hope about what we actually don't know about our rights in Canada. I mean, a lot of us see those being eroded like on the daily. And she has a community of people that share and disseminate information in a groundbreaking way that I think is going to revolutionize the way people have access to some of this information, because not all of this information is being put in front of you. In fact, she talks about in that episode how a friend of hers that went to law school and, some of these different principles stopped being taught at a specific time. So a valuable voice and so much wisdom. And I think she can share with a lot of us about ideas that maybe we don't know about. So from there, we go into a conversation. Now, this one was called The Art and Language of Love. And that's a book with Jessica Ruger out of Charleston, South Carolina. And she is just, honestly, I love her. Her energy was so contagious. Her vulnerability was just so she's so authentic. She's so raw. And she takes us on a journey of just some of the way that she was able to transform her thoughts, her mindset. Her book, The Art and Language of Love, is available as well. And yeah, she's just a gem of a guest. So from there, we go to a lady by the name of Cindy Van Arnhem, who teaches us how to harness our numerology and the day and the time that we were born for business success. So in this episode, we actually use my birth date and my numbers, and she breaks down and she gets into it with me on why I am the way I am, why certain things are happening for me the way they're happening for me. And she has a valuable community and support for people in business that want to up their ante and up their way of being based off of a little bit more of these principles and some of the tips and tricks and methods and times that we should be doing different things. And it was just so insightful. She had so much wisdom, and I hadn't actually applied or explored a lot of what she had shared before. So now from here, you guys, this was honestly one of my most jaw-dropping conversations. I was able to talk with Dr. Sam Osmanagic, who was the founder of the Bosnian pyramids. Now, this conversation and this idea, he was able to share with us so much about how our ideas and perhaps our history, as we've been told, isn't probably accurate. And he discovered this Bosnian pyramid complex a long time ago. It's been one of the longest archaeological dig sites since. And some of the healing properties, astrological connections, some of the technology that, he feels was used, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. That episode, he knows so much more than I know that I've heard yet. He's authored probably 27 different books on ancient archaeological sites. He's a well-renowned author. He's putting together a conference in June in Bosnia of people from all over the world. It's a fascinating podcast, and I was so honored to be able to have the opportunity to talk to him. So from here, we go into a conversation with an absolute favorite person of mine, Autumn Skye. Now, Autumn is an incredible artist, among other things, musician, among other things, but I was able to experience her artwork in a way that I've never experienced artwork before. I'm telling you, it had me standing in a room with tears just rolling off my cheeks, and I did not know what the hell was happening. And she came up to me at this event and we talked, and her art moved me in a way that I have never felt or been moved before. And it's not to say that I haven't seen beautiful artwork before, but we get into a conversation about creativity, what it actually means, how most of us are creative in so many ways that we don't even express it or realize it. And it was just, she is 100% transparent. She's so authentic. And I believe that she takes these gifts that are given to her by somewhere outside of this realm and transports them onto a piece of paper so that you can feel things that you are meant to feel. So you're going to want to watch Autumn. So from here, we're getting into the last few episodes. Stick with us. So from here, it's Christmas time, and I was sitting there and I'm like, I just want to be able to, wouldn't it be great if we could tell a story about a Christmas miracle? And I'm scrolling through my phone and I see this story pop up on Facebook. And I'm like, it was talking about this lady that had this near death experience, how her body had been healed in ways that they couldn't even explain. And she came out of this near death experience with all of these memories, all of these different things, knowledge of just so much more than what her physical body had previously known. And so this was called near death experience or divine intervention. And her name was Amelia Kovac. So she shares her journey of what transpired. And from that moment before, after, and perhaps why she's been brought back to really help humanity, and some of the things that she talks about really challenge a lot of our perceptions, but it's fascinating. So from here, the very first episode of January was one that I hold dear to my heart, which was an episode called Navigating the Big C with actually a friend of mine, Cheryl McCartney. So she is going through a cancer experience, and her journey and her personal mindset and just how she is navigating life and some of the lessons that she brings and how she was able to do it with such grace and resiliency. And I think anybody in this situation, but mostly anybody that is handling life, which is all of us, are going to want to listen to Cheryl's episode. So then the last one, the 50th episode, and it was only 50 episodes because I missed a couple weeks in the summertime when my daughter got married, of recording. But this last episode was called What Every Entrepreneur Should Know with Harvey Connor. Now, Harvey, his mindset, I'm telling you, just out of full transparency, he's in his late 70s, and he is thinking in ways that most of us didn't at 40. He's thinking outside of the box. He's an author of 2 books. He is such an inspiration to so many people. His mindset and his attitude of life is contagious. And he is actually publishing his book in a way that just fascinated me. And I knew I wanted to share him when I heard what he was doing. He actually published his book on the blockchain, and his way of sharing it and also providing income to people that do share it fascinated me. So any author out there, anyone that has something to get out there to people, you're going to want to hear his book. It's all about entrepreneurship and mindset. So thank you for coming on this episode of, the long-winded journey of 50 episodes. But I just feel so grateful to have been able to do this. I'm going to keep doing this. And this has lit up something in me that I know that it's just what I have to do. So, but that being said, if you know of other people, if you know of other stories, if, as you can see, a lot of these people are just ordinary people having unordinary experiences. So if you know of things, if you know of people that you feel like you need to connect me with, reach out or have them reach out and apply to be on our podcast. I thank you for your time. Thanks for watching, whether it was this episode or all 50 like my mom. And you know what? 26 is going to be our year. So have a great one.